Okay.
Okay. Well, okay. So let me present you, Emily. I hope that's fine for you.
Sure.
Şimdi burada bulunmaktan hem büyük onur hem de büyük heyecan duymaktayım. Çünkü Emily hocamız hem planlama camiasında hem araştırmalarıyla hem çalışmalarıyla çok büyük etki yaratmış bir hocamız. Birçok ödülleri var, birçok çalışmaları var. 70'e aşkın makalesi, 5 tane kitabı, en sonuncusu da 2018'de yayınlanmış olan Mahalle isimli kitabı, Neighborhood diye söyleyebiliriz. Kitabı var. O yüzden kendisiyle birlikte burada olmaktan büyük onur duyduğumu söylemek istiyorum. Biraz da size kendisini tanıtmak istiyorum. Emily şehir planlama ve politika bölümünde Chicago Üniversitesi'nde hem öğretim üyesi hem de araştırmacı. Bir şehircilik üzerine laboratuvarı var ve aynı zamanda da dersler veriyor. Aslında sanırım lisansta sosyoloji bölümünden mezun ama master ve doktora da hem kent coğrafyası hem de şehir planlama üzerine uzmanlığını yapmış. Aynı zamanda da dediğim gibi birçok ödüle sahip olmuş. Ondan sonra da zaten hani alanımızda büyük etki yaratmış bir hocamız. I would like to now present you in English as well. Professor Emily Talen is affiliated with College of Urban Planning and Public Affairs, Department of Urban Planning and Policy at University of Chicago. She teaches urban design and directs the Urbanism Lab. She has extensive research and publication on topics of urban design, new urbanism, and social equity. And she has published over 70 peer-reviewed articles, 5 books, including the last one published in 2018, Neighborhood. She is also co-editor of Journal of Urbanism. I would like to also complete this presentation with a personal note, as I'm honored to present her here. I had the chance to meet with her when I was a PhD student at Ohio State University, and I was stunned by her energy, intellectual capacity, and sincerity. So I hope you will also enjoy this presentation as well as I do. So the stage is yours, Emily. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. And I'm happy to be here with you all in Turkey. I'm actually very far away from you right now, but I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I'm going to work through some slides on the topic of neighborhood. They are based on the book on neighborhood that I wrote a couple years ago. And here we go. Hopefully this will all work. You see that okay? So, okay, so the neighborhood.
Okay, now it's on.
Coming through. Okay, great. So this is about the neighborhood as an ideal. Is it still relevant? Basically, what I try to work through in this research culminating in my book is understanding how the neighborhood, the idea of neighborhood, the concept of neighborhood used to be a lot more, I think, a lot more place-based, a lot more impactful for people. And it, at least in Western societies, and particularly in the US, it became something much, much different than what it used to be. And so you might know that about 30 years ago, there was a movement to try to get the neighborhood reinstated as a basis of urban planning in a more traditional sense. And I'm talking about the new urbanism, which was a movement which was mostly a US-based movement, but very much aligned with sustainable cities, sustainable urban planning. And they took neighborhood as the basic building block of of urban development and how cities ought to grow. So I really wanted to explore, well, is that still really a relevant way of doing things? What has transpired about this concept of neighborhood? And one of the themes that comes out very quickly when you start thinking about neighborhood is how much it means so many different things. And we've kind of lost our sense of what the neighborhood is. And it can be absolutely everything. It's used in marketing tools. You'll walk into a local drugstore in the US and it will say, this drugstore is your neighborhood, and kind of equating neighborhood with any number of different things that we experience in urban environments. So, so with that kind of loose understanding of what a neighborhood is it really feasible to get it back to being something as traditionally experienced? And there were pros and cons to that traditional experience, as I'm going to talk about. I think we kind of are a bit caught between neighborhood as something pretty contrived. And so that image on the right is a, designed neighborhood unit from the early 20th century. So we're kind of caught in between. We react against this sort of very top-down, what seems deterministic idea of the neighborhood plan, and neighborhood is absolutely anything. So Jane Jacobs was one of the first people to really recognize and write about the fact that neighborhood had become something really difficult. And what she meant by calling neighborhood a Valentine was that it didn't really have any meaning other than just being kind of a convenient geographic description. And what it needed to be relevant was to actually have political power, to be something with that could really manage growth and have a direct line into decision-making power of the city. And that's one of the things that has really been lost. And she talked about these different levels of neighborhood. And the first level of neighborhood, as she saw it, was the street level neighborhood. And this was very much based on small businesses interacting at the street level and this kind of sense of neighborhood that happens along a commercial corridor because there's so much social interaction that happens with that street frontage. And that is connecting the surrounding residents to place and giving the neighborhood kind of a focus. So it was all about the social connection. And so it probably in many other countries outside of the US and probably Turkey, I have been there, there is still quite a bit of engagement going on with the street level neighborhood. In the US context, and this is, a lot of what I have to say is I tried to be global in my examples and all time periods I draw from, but the lessons learned are really kind of directed at the Western cities and in particular the US. This loss, especially after the pandemic, we have been losing this storefront retail social exchange because we've been losing those businesses. Or a lot of these businesses have been converting to housing, or there are just long-term vacancies now. And this was ongoing before the pandemic, but it's heightened even more. So if the street level neighborhood is supposed to be the basis of, or the street is supposed to be the basis of your neighborhood, we have a real problem here when we start losing those businesses. So Jane Jacobs also talked about neighborhood as something called a district. And here is where this might be like an elected, here's where you might actually get political representation. You get an elected leader for a designated area in a city. a lot of places have this, of course. And in Chicago, where I live, we have these districts. There's 50 of them for the city. And but the problem here is that these districts are very convoluted, and there isn't a direct association between the outlines of a political district and your actual sense of neighborhood, and where you meet and greet and shop and do everything you need to do in a localized area. So and you can see that these wards, as we call them, are very gerrymandered, is the term we use, and no connection between place and political representation. This is probably very US centric, but if you start to think about all the different political representations of various kinds in a city, and you start to overlay them. So what I'm showing here are things like police precincts. They have their own boundaries. We have census tracts where, social information is gathered. We have the area, the 5-minute walk around a school. We have the wards. We have other kinds of, might have a water district. So different kinds of political entities, and none of them line up. None of them work together to bolster a place-based neighborhood. They all have their own jurisdictional parameters. So in that sense, we've really kind of lost things. So I make the case that a neighborhood, people ask me a lot, well, what is a neighborhood and how do you define it? So that you have to make a difference between neighborhood as an ideal and neighborhood as something that exists. And, these are very different things, but I like being an urban planner, an urban designer. I like to talk about the aspirational idea of neighborhood. And I think that neighborhood, to be a really great neighborhood aspirationally, it needs 3 things. It needs to have a strong sense of identity, it needs to have connectedness, and it needs to have political representation. So in the first sense of identity, it has a name, it has a generally agreed upon sense of where it is and what it is, and it has boundaries of some sort, but these are not hard boundaries, obviously. These are just boundaries that give identity and allow people to know where something is. And I find that this is a really tough thing to deal with, as I'll talk about in a little bit, this notion of boundedness. And also it has a center of some sort. It has something that can stand in as its center. But it also has to have connection, both internal connection and external connection. And neighborhoods have got into a lot of the concept of neighborhood, as planners tried to rework it, as I'm going to talk about in a minute, had a lot of problems with maintaining this, because neighborhood, as it was defined, started to be very insular, and this idea that it has to be self-contained, and it only should focus on that interior connection, but it really needs to be connected in both sense of the term. And then, of course, it has to have some way of representation. People have a way of having their voice be heard, but you have to be able to present a collective voice, some way of people coming together to make decisions about things. So why is all of this needed? Why should we have neighborhoods that are like this? And I think we need to have a good sense of why we're doing this, in order to, or at least I do, to be able to make the case that this is an important thing to aspire to. And so I think that the reasons have to do with one of the biggest reasons that I present in the book is that there are gains to be made by people having a connection with place, because if they have that connection and identity, then they will invest in that place and care about it. And whether or not something's happening on the street, people will feel like it's their responsibility to get involved in it. But probably the most important reason, I'm just going to give you a couple of my reasons. I develop a lot of reasons in the book because I'm a little, I guess I'm a little sensitive to the critique of, well, why should we do this? We're just fine just having neighborhoods be tailgating parties. We don't need to have planners do these neighborhood things. But I think the most important thing is that often neighborhoods are kind of a stand-in for social segregation and social separation. And we have become very much a society, and I'll say this about the US case, but I think it's true all over the world, where you live defines who you are. And that, there's rich neighborhoods and poor neighborhoods and Black neighborhoods and Hispanic neighborhoods, and it's all kind of tied, so that place becomes so defining about your lot in life. And getting back to the traditional sense of neighborhood, I think, gets rid of or does away with that to some degree. And instead, your identity and sense of self is about your place and not about people around, not about the people being similar to you. Instead, it's about many people of diverse backgrounds being in one place. So it's kind of substituting place for social definition. And I think that is really important. And in fact, in the historical record, neighborhoods were socially diverse. Neighborhoods, and partly this was a result of not being technologically driven cities where you could easily drive wherever and kind of escape. You had to be, these were pedestrian-based cities often. So you had to live close together. But what people of varying backgrounds living in one place, what that meant was that even people of lesser means got to experience the same public realm as people with much higher economic means. So that's a huge, huge benefit for society in general. And I also have a book about social diversity and how important that is in cities. And I'm not alone in thinking this, but I just think that it's that design aspect of caring about the public realm and making that a shared resource for many people is absolutely essential. So I think those are the main things. Substituting place for homogeneity, that's really the basis. So the basis of neighborhood consciousness is place rather than people that are just like you. Okay, so let me just pivot here. That's all sort of preamble. I'll just kind of pivot to a little bit about neighborhood history. We see neighborhood in all time periods. This was a really fun part of doing research for this book, is consulting with archaeologists, anthropologists, people, who have been out there excavating ancient cities and really thinking about what they find is an urban structure that's neighborhood based. And these developments are in cells, so the uncovering the city is in cells of various types. And here's right in your own backyard in Turkey. In China, I came across a scholar who was trying to resurrect the neighborhood units in 8th century Chang'an. And this is his digital representation of neighborhood, but he has a book about this, about 8th century neighborhoods in China. And from the historical record, he was able to map out how these various housing units were organized around central spaces, central public spaces. And they were very much defined units in that Chinese ancient city. This is neighborhoods in 1622 map of Batavia, which later became Jakarta. And you see this representation of, kind of cellular units of various kinds. I want to show you one example of how historians have come to know that the neighborhoods in cities, historical cities, were diverse. And this was an interesting study, just one example, of looking at what the rent levels were for this Dutch city in the 17th century, and able to quantify that there were, very much different rent levels all together in one particular neighborhood. And so this gets back to the point of what this means is people paying very little rent were sharing the same public realm as people with much more means. And so probably there's a lot of benefit to be had for that sharing of public resources. And so the kind of takeaway from all of this historical record, and I have a lot more examples in the book, which you'll just have to run out and buy, is that as cities evolved, there was very much this, and I have a quote there, they were the cellular dynamic of urban change. So it's city by cell, growth by cell. And what that meant for people, we sometimes can know from the historical record, but we're also kind of surmising. So then everything changed. So the historical record is this cellular dynamic, but then along came the massive industrialization that happened in the 19th century. And it's the century of urbanization. And it's really just put an incredible strain on this notion of cellular unit growth in the city. And because everything became technologically driven, you had fast communication, you had, cars coming into the picture, you had very large scale development going on, you had massive industrial work. So everything becomes mega. And that puts a real strain on neighborhoods. And one of the interesting things that happens with that, this mass society that went along with urbanization, is that the sociologists, so sociology is just becoming a field in the early 20th century, late 19th century. And these early sociologists were reacting to this industrial city, and they were very much alarmed, and they very much focused on the loss of neighborhood life. And they talked about the how society was just, we needed to get back to what they called village life. We needed to people were being alienated in the big industrial city. People had no sense of themselves. They were losing identity, all these things. They were losing their social relationships. There was no social connection. So they wanted to get the neighborhood back. And so they teamed up with urban planners, because the sociologists were writing in very, abstract theoretical ways. And they had actually conferences with this early group of sociologists. And around the same time, urban planning in the US becomes an official, it just said my connection is unstable. Am I coming across okay? Okay. They are teaming up with urban planners to try to give this notion that we need to get village life back. We need to get the neighborhood back in this massive industrial city. How do we make that happen? So urban planners, please figure out a way to make that happen. And urban planners come up with this idea of, well, we're urban planners, we can plan the neighborhood back. So before, with the historical development, neighborhoods were just kind of happening. There wasn't so much predetermined urban planning work going on for the neighborhood. There was some, but anyway, one of the first neighborhood plans that or planning notions that comes along is the City Club of Chicago's Neighborhood Design Contest that they have in 1912. And there is a book that has all of these plans in them that were submitted. There was something like, I don't know, I want to say there was like 80 submissions. And these plans are absolutely beautiful. I've often thought they look like mosaic tiles. They're just, you know, and they were meant to be like transit-oriented development. You know, they were based on there was train access. They were supposed to be walkable. They were supposed to be mixed in housing type, which would mean that they would have some degree of social diversity within them. And this idea really took off of planning the neighborhood as a unit. And so, for example, Walter Burley Griffin does this plan of Canberra in Australia, which is the capital of Australia. And it's all neighborhood unit based. It's, in fact, I have a quote in the book about somebody describing it as a sausage machine that spits out neighborhoods. So it's, everything is just in these cellular units, and that's how the city was conceived and is composed. And then, you know, a decade or so later, you have, of course, the most well-known neighborhood unit proposal that comes along, and that's by Clarence Perry, who was a sociologist, and he really worked out what these neighborhood units should be, and really made the case that, you know, cities need to be developed by neighborhood unit, and that's the structure that cities need to be based on. So his idea was, you know, you have some kind of community, you have some kind of public space at the center of the neighborhood. So a community center, a school at the neighborhood, a church at the neighborhood center. And then everything would be organized around this 5-minute walk from the center to the edge. It would all be on 160 acres. It would have a certain percentage of recreation and park space. You know, the whole thing fits within a 1/4 mile radius, and there's 5,000 population, and you have your shops at the periphery and public spaces at the center. Well, one of the critiques of this, and there were many critiques, which I go through all those critiques, but even though the new urbanists in the 1980s really picked up on this model and really wanted to support it. But I'll just tell you, the immediate critique that comes to mind here is the insularity that this is breeding, because of the way that you have these strong arterials and highways bounding the neighborhood. So it's not, and you don't have the streets don't go through. So instead, it's all about internal connectivity and not external connectivity. So anyway, Clarence Perry worked this out for different kinds of neighborhoods. The other one I'm showing there on the right is an industrial-based neighborhood. You still have school at the center, but there's industry there. So, you know, some good ideas here of Clarence Perry's, but definitely some problems as well. There were modernist versions of the neighborhood unit. Here's a famous modernist architect, Richard Neutra, 1942. He's basing his plan for this town on the neighborhood unit, but his conception is to have everybody kind of face, be on these like finger-like, park spaces, and, people are facing that way. But the modernist architects were very much enamored with the neighborhood unit idea. Even Le Corbusier, which I'll show you in the next example, is Chandigarh in India. And that is completely neighborhood based, building the city according to these cells. Of course, again, this does a little better with connectivity, but one of the critiques here is the neighborhood unit was easily used as a way to socially segregate. So whereas the neighborhood was historically supposed to be about a way of integrating people, because you would organize their lives around these neighborhood units with central common spaces. Instead, in a place like here, neighborhood number 50 through whatever is for lower class people, and neighborhood number 1 and 2 is for upper class, that kind of thing. Not exactly. So it's really a perversion of what the ideal neighborhood is supposed to be like. Just to show you another example, the master plan of Kuwait, laid out by British planners. And this is, I'm showing 8 neighborhood units of 6,000 residents each. These have a mosque at the center, and shops, a public hall, and there's a site for industry. So the where things really take off is where you have the neighborhood unit being adopted by the Urban Land Institute, which was a developer organization in the US. And they basically said to the developers of the world, use this neighborhood unit to plan out all this growth to accommodate post-World War II growth. And so they did that. But the problem is that they didn't exactly stick to the, as is so often the case in neighborhood, in planning in general, good ideas, when they get implemented, things go haywire. I mean, planning would be great if we stuck to the idealized principles, but, things break down. So, very quickly you start to get conceptions like this as the neighborhood unit. This was conceived as a neighborhood unit. Here now, the public space, the centralized public space, is a golf course. And, there's really very little you could say here that's seems to emulate the idea of Clarence Perry and what he was going for. No walkability, of course. I think even the modernist architects wouldn't have liked it. Neighborhood units take off in Russia, or the former Soviet Union. You have the microrayon, as it's called, which is basically a lot of high rises, but it has all the elements of that neighborhood unit idea, right? It's got the housing, it's got the public space, there's a school, there's a shop, it's got everything you need for your daily life. But it's in this modernist urban form that's really lacking human scale. It's lacking integration. It's lacking connectivity, internal and external, all kinds of issues one could take with the particular form of the neighborhood unit being proposed here. The Chinese adopt neighborhood planning principles from the Soviet Union. Bad idea. Did go on my critique. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the issues that came up, the design issues that have come up and that I review in the book about neighborhoods. One of them is about boundaries, and I was surprised to see that neighborhood boundaries and how to do that was being discussed even way back in 1960. And this is an interesting document. It's online. talking about the different kinds of neighborhoods on the south side of Chicago, where you have rich and poor, black and white. And the idea here is that neighborhood boundary, that commercial area running down the center, the black land use, that is going to be a boundary that operates like a seam. So it gives spatial definition to the neighborhoods on either side, but it's going to connect people on either side and integrate them. That did not happen. And one of the reasons is that that nobody paid attention to the design of that commercial seam. And it's just a huge road with a lot of traffic and many dying businesses. It's not at all going to function like a neighborhood boundary as a seam. So there's a host of other issues and debates that come up with the neighborhood unit, and or neighborhoods in general, neighborhood planning. And that's what I find really interesting about studying the neighborhood as a concept. The kind of squabbles that go on, and how something that seems like motherhood and apple pie, you know, as we say in the US, can become a target of division or derision. So I'll just give you one example. You know, sometimes neighborhoods are thought of as being personally defined. So if that is the case, that, you know, neighborhoods are personally defined, it's really hard to have a kind of normative vision of what the neighborhood should be. So, and this has been going on for a really, really long time. Even back in 1941, here's somebody talking about mapping out the neighborhood as a cognitive kind of a thing. So if everybody's running around with their own individual conceptions of neighborhood, that's absolutely fine, and that's the reality. But then what do you do about forming a neighborhood that everyone can share? And so that's been one of the tensions, trying to have a normative understanding of neighborhood, and how does that intersect with these private worlds, these personal neighborhoods. There's also a lot of debate and kind of back and forth about what is the appropriate scale of a neighborhood. Here's an immigrant neighborhood gathering in 1920 Chicago. Were people really having a collective voice in these kinds of situations? Or were they just being controlled? Was the neighborhood kind of a way of controlling people? So that's a kind of debate that goes on. Then there's the whole issue of social determinism, and how the neighborhood was used as, and there was a big exhibit of, this was called The Neighborhood and You. And it was at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City in 1945. And there was a set of panels that were distributed all over the world to talk about the neighborhood as being the basis, how it needs to be the basis of social life. And there's a lot of, it just gets kind of creepy. You know, it's very deterministic. If you live in a neighborhood, then you will be a responsible citizen. If you live in a planned neighborhood, you're going to get along with others. You're going to have a good social life. You're going to, you know, it's all going to be wonderful. And so the neighborhood, the planned neighborhood, gets implicated in this social determinism, very top down. And also this kind of forced idea that you're going to be friends with people who live in your neighborhood, you know. So it's kind of I call it social confusion, you know. It's and Jane Jacobs actually talked a lot about this. You know, having social connection in your neighborhood is not at all about being friends. It's about being socially connected on some level, maybe just a glance, some familiarity with somebody on some level, with a shopkeeper. That's a far cry from being friends. And so or having people in your neighborhood be in your social circle. And so the confusion over that stimulated a lot of reaction against the neighborhood unit. And there was a lot of writing about how the neighborhood unit was just a terrible idea. Planning the neighborhood was a terrible idea, and we shouldn't have anything to do with it. And then there was stuff like this, which it would get even more perverse. Eliel Saarinen writing this book, The City, where he's actually making the claim that if cities are not in neighborhoods, then the people in there are socially diseased. You know, like the image on the left is diseased cell tissue. The image on the right, you have healthy cell tissue. So sure, he was saying that, you know, cities become diseased, but very quickly this translates to people being, being social degenerates if they're not within that neighborhood cell structure. So that's a problem. I think I've talked about social segregation, the neighborhood unit being implicated as in a way that heightened social segregation. So this is an example of a public housing project in the US, and this happened all over the US in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s, throughout the 20th century. We're going to plan new housing projects based on the neighborhood unit. And so what this is the neighborhood unit equals social segregation, because these public housing projects were very much socially segregated. And that happened all over the world. Of course, developers kind of today build by neighborhood unit. They call it the neighborhood unit, and it is a mechanism of social segregation. It's kind of organizing housing development according to very different price points. And that just becomes a method of segregation. So I guess this is my last slide. I'll just say, will we continue to be the cellular city of tomorrow? I definitely see the appeal. I still think that planning by neighborhood and cities in this neighborhood form is still the way to go, but we have to understand the liabilities and the problems with social confusion, social determination, social segregation, design issues having to do with boundaries and public space. There's all kinds of things to deal with that I think planners can deal with, but we just have to have our eyes wide open about what the neighborhood is going to mean. So I think I'll just stop there. I've been rambling for a long time. Seems like a long time. Are we going to have questions or?
Yes, if you have time, that would be great, because I'm sure that there are some questions. I haven't received any of them, but I think, I was told that we should, talk a little bit here and look for the questions. This is our also closing session. It is morning over there, but it is almost evening here. That's why, and we have a long day
so
of
you
sessions.
guys are ready to.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you're ready to go out for dinner now. Okay. But
yeah.
Can you go out for dinner? What's the? Okay.
Yeah, we can.
Are you guys open?
Yeah, the cafes are open.
Okay, restaurants are open.
Yes. How about you in Chicago?
Yeah. Restaurants are open, but we're not doing well with keeping our cases down. You know, keeps going up. Do you have a lot of cases or?
Yes, we
COVID
have a lot of cases as well. Yes, especially in Ankara, surprisingly, we have a high number of cases because it's not the biggest city, but we have high numbers. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I hope.
Are people wearing masks?
Yeah, everyone is. It's obligated now.
Okay.
Is it
And
also
people do
obligated?
it?
Yeah, people do it willingly because everybody is scared, and it is devastating as it might be also in the US and in Chicago. Is it also obligatory over there?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, they say it's more like the governments are trying to encourage it. It's obligated for entering a store or going into a restaurant, but just walking around, probably about half of people don't have masks on. So that's kind of a problem. Americans don't like to be told what to do.
Yeah, I understand. Well, I have a question though. Why the local shops are closing after the COVID? Because here it is more likely that the shops at shopping centers are struggling with economic sustainability. I mean, the streets are vivid. Shopping centers are now struggling. It is, I guess, the reverse over there after the COVID. It was surprising to hear that.
You mean like the shopping malls?
Yeah, the shopping malls are struggling here, but the street shops are not really struggling. They are struggling, of course, but they are used more often.
Oh, really? I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, because it is outside and people feel safer, I think, outside.
Right. What about like those bazaars that you have over there with the what's that big huge bazaar that's in Istanbul? I mean, you have them all over, right? Those are sort of enclosed, aren't they?
Yeah, they are always mostly enclosed. Some of them have some outside space, but it is limited.
So those are the ones that are struggling.
The closed ones are struggling. You rarely see people, and now we are developing a maybe public space culture, a new public space culture. People are using parks more often. Before they weren't using it that much, but after the COVID, they are not going to the shopping centers, but going to the parks. Although they wear masks, they still go to the parks instead.
Huh. I think that's the same here. I think that shopping malls are not doing well.
Yeah. How about
not doing well? They were struggling even way before COVID, and now they're struggling even more. Yeah, but I've talked to some small business owners in Chicago, and they say they're doing better than ever because people don't want to go to the big Home Depot and those big stores. They want to shop at their local place. So that's great.
Yes, it's the same, I guess. Okay. It's the same here as well. It's interesting. I mean, outside people go to the outside shops or street shops, but not indoor shops.
Huh.
Okay.
Well, you have the weather.
We have the weather. What?
You have the weather to be able to do that. I worry because winter is coming, and the weather is going to turn very, very cold, very nasty, and I don't know what that's going to do. People are trying to put up heat lamps so that they can keep the outdoor eating going. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. Okay. I was told by the institute that if you could stay for a little bit, 5 more minutes maybe, it would be nice, because we are going to close the session right now. And I think the questions are limited. I cannot see any questions. So I would like to thank you for your time, for accepting to be here with us. It's an honor, as I said, and thank you for sharing your perspective on neighborhoods. It is really eye-opening. And I think your presentation has changed immensely. I really enjoyed this time again.
Oh, you're so kind. It was my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. So, şimdi ben sözü Kent Araştırmaları Enstitüsü yöneticilerine vereceğim. Emir Bey. Merhabalar Emir Bey. Tam anlaşamadık galiba. Ben anlayamamışım. Sorular gelecek diye düşünüyordum. O yüzden biraz zaman kaybettim galiba. Şimdi şey yapabiliriz herhalde. Kapanışı yapabiliriz ama Emily'ye herhalde siz de bir konuşursanız iyi olur.
Evet Burcu Hocam çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Çok sağ olun. Emily Hanım'a da, Emily Hocamıza da çok teşekkür ediyoruz. 5. Kent Araştırmaları Konferansı'nın, Kongresi'nin kapanış oturumunu Sayın Profesör Doktor Emily Talen'in yapması bizim için gerçekten onur verici. Gerçekten yani hem kongrenin anlamı ve önemine tamı tamıyla oturan bir konuşma yaptı, hem de izleyicilerimizin, dinleyicilerimizin çok önemsediği bir konu üzerinden son konferansı yapmış olduk. Size de katkılarınızdan dolayı çok teşekkür ediyorum Burcu Hocam. Gerçekten sizi yorduk. Yani bugün hem oturum başkanlığınız oldu, hem sağlıklı kentle ilgili güzel bir sunum yaptınız. Ben konferansın kapanışını yaparken gördüğünüz gibi ekip arkadaşlarımla birlikte, Kent Araştırmaları Enstitüsü'nden arkadaşlarımla birlikteyiz. Bu toplantının gerçekleştirilmesi için bir yıldır gerçekten gece gündüz emek veren çok sayıda arkadaşımız oldu. 7 Ekim tarihinde konferansın açılış günü, konferansımızın açılışına teşrif ederek katkıda bulunan çok değerli isimler oldu. Öncelikle onlara çok teşekkür ediyorum. Ankara Üniversitesi Siyasal Bilgiler Fakültesi Dekanı, Dekan Yardımcısı Can Giray Hocamıza, hocaların hocası Ruşen Keleş Hocamız yine açılışta konuştu. Yine ona da teşekkür ediyoruz. Yerel Yönetimler Politika Kurulu Başkanı Sayın Profesör Doktor Şükrü Karatepe hocamıza gerçekten çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Bu konferansın önemli özel oturumlarından 4 oturumun uzun süredir sahadan veri toplanma süreçleriyle yürüttüğümüz belediyeler için hizmet rehberleri projesinin gerçekleştirilmesi sürecine çok önemli katkıları oldu. Ondan dolayı kendisine de çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Bunun dışında Kent Konseyi Başkanımız yine konferansın başından itibaren, yani hazırlıkların başladığı tarihten bugüne kadar Ankara Kent Konseyi Başkanı'nın da ciddi anlamda katkıları oldu. Kendisine de çok teşekkür ediyoruz bu vesileyle. Onun dışında tabii kongrenin en önemli parçalarından birisi özel oturumlardı. Uğur Tanyeli Hoca konferansın açılış özel oturumunu gerçekleştirdi. Bu anlamda Uğur Tanyeli Hoca'ya da minnettarız. Ardından Jale Erzen Hocamız çok güzel bir sunum yaptı. Kendisi Alaçatı'daydı. Ankara'ya gelemedi. Pandemiden dolayı Alaçatı'da kalmaya devam ediyor. Kısa bir süre sonra geleceğini belirtti. Bütün aksaklıklara rağmen başka bir yere taşındı ve konferansa daha iyi bir internet ortamından erişebilmek için güzel bir konuşma yaptı. Kendisine de yine teşekkür ediyorum. Şimdi biz normalde işte her yıl bu konferansı yapmaya çalışıyoruz. Konferansın bir sonraki etabını da normalde yani yaptığımız konferansın sonunda açıklamaya çalışıyoruz. 2021 yılının konferansını, yani 6. Kent Araştırmaları Kongresi'ni de konut üzerine yapmaya karar verdik. Bugün burada bu meseleyi de açıklamaktan gerçekten mutluyum. Konut çünkü Türkiye'de hala halledilememiş bir sorun. Yani birçok açıdan halledilememiş bir sorun. Hem nüfus mobilitesi çok yüksek, hem her geçen gün nüfusumuz artıyor. Hem 1999 depreminden önce yapılan sağlıksız konutlar var. Bu konutların yenilenme süreçleri yani birçok açıdan verimli gitse de hala 7 milyona yakın Türkiye'de riskli konut durumu söz konusu. Bunlarla birlikte şöyle bir şey de var. Yani bu konutların hani çok çok iyi depreme dayanıklı konutlar üretsek de çevresiyle, yapılı çevresiyle, yeşil alanlarıyla, yürüyüş yollarıyla birlikte düşündüğümüzde kaliteli ve yaşam kalitesine yaraşır nitelikte konut üretimi son derece sıkıntılı konular arasında. Bununla birlikte düşük gelirli grubun konuta erişimi ayrı bir sorun. Bütün bunları konutun farklı biçimlerde sunumu, konut üretimi, Türkiye'deki konut üretiminin başından sonuna sosyal açıdan, ekonomik açıdan değerlendireceğimiz bir kongre ve konferans planlıyoruz. 2021 yılının konferansını bu şekilde düşünüyoruz. Bu şekilde gerçekleştireceğiz. İnşallah hayırlı olur. İnşallah güzel olur. Bunun için uğraşıyoruz. Tekrar ben emeği geçen bütün herkese teşekkür ediyorum. Şimdi tabii bu konferansın başarılı bir şekilde gerçekleştirilmesinde Kent Araştırmaları Enstitüsü Genel Sekreteri başta olmak üzere ekibin çok ciddi anlamda emekleri var. Ben son sözü Genel Sekreter Yusuf Sunar arkadaşımıza devrediyorum. O da bir şeyler söylemek ister. Buyurun Yusuf Bey.
Evet, çok teşekkür ediyorum Emir Hocam. Kent Araştırmaları Enstitüsü olarak gönüllülük esasıyla yaşadığımız şehirlerin daha yaşanabilir olması için bireysel mükellefiyetimizi kolektif bir akılla yerine getirmenin gayretindeyiz. 2010 yılından beri kentlerimize ilişkin raporlar yayınlıyoruz. Kent Araştırmaları Kongresi'ni her yıl düzenliyoruz. İdealKent dergisiyle akademiye önemli bir katkı koymaya çalışıyoruz. Uluslararası İdealKent ödülleriyle kentsel aktörleri teşvik etmeye çalışıyoruz. Bizler içinde yaşadığımız dünyanın bize emanet olduğu düşüncesiyle emaneti korumak için çalışmaya devam edeceğiz. Bu yılki kongrenin kapanışında ben de kongremize bildiri gönderen katılımcılara, danışma kuruluna, düzenleme kuruluna, bilim kuruluna, İdealKent ekibimize ve partnerlerimize çok teşekkür ediyorum. Kent Araştırmaları Kongreleri uzun ve yoğun bir çalışmanın ürünü olduğunu ve arkasında arkadaşlarımızın çok kıymetli emekleri olduğunu ifade etmek isterim. Bu anlamda Kent Araştırmaları Enstitüsü'nün değerli koordinatörü Emir Osmanoğlu hocamıza, Sedat Okuroğlu'na, Hüseyin Aktaş'a, Elif Helvacı'ya, Hicret Battalıoğlu'na, Özgür Tülebağ'a, Şafak Bilen'e, Büşra Gezer'e, Pınar Çoban Yılmaz Öztürk'e, Mustafa Sunar'a ve Esma Eroğlu'na ve tabii kongre çalışmalarından dolayı istemeden ihmal ettiğim halde her türlü desteğini esirgemeyen değerli eşim ve sevgili kızıma çok teşekkür ediyorum. 6. Kent Araştırmaları Kongresi'nde buluşmak dileğiyle diyorum. Sağlıcakla kalın.
Evet. Teşekkür ediyoruz.